And so I think we'll... Hi, everybody, and we are now at the top of hour 18, and I am pleased to turn over moderating duties to Cindra Feuer from AVAC. So Cindra, I really enjoyed this last hour. Lots of great talks, lots of conversation. Where are you right now? Is it really early or really late?
No. Hello, everyone, as Annette said, and nice to meet you, Annette. I'm Cindra Feuer. I'm actually calling in from Eastern France, so it's 10 a.m. So it's perfect timing to start my day.
Okay, wonderful. Well, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll see you in a little bit when I'm speaking in this session and after you.
Right. Thanks, Annette. So hi, everyone. Like I said, or like Annette said, this is the 18th hour. Good for you, for all of you who have been slogging through live the entire time. I feel very fresh after a good night's sleep. So we do have a really nice sort of eclectic lineup this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are. First, I'm actually going to do the first presentation, and I'm Cindra Feuer from AVAC, Global Advocacy for HIV Prevention. And then after me goes Annette, who you had just met, who actually was hosting the last hour. And Annette, as you probably know, is from Treat Asia, and she's in Bangkok right now, and she's going to present on treatment and mental health, which is kind of exciting, pretty exciting. And then after Annette, to close us out, is the revered Glenda Gray, Dr. Glenda Gray from South Africa, who heads up the SAMRC, and she's going to be taking us through HIV vaccines. So and I'm going to actually request for the upload of my slides right now, and I'm going to talk about the real need for trans and gender diverse inclusion in HIV research. So here we go, everyone. Hour 18, buckle up. It's going to be a ride. So we, meaning AVAC and Hank, are presenting I'm presenting on behalf of AVAC and Hank. We undertook this project. Oh, I advanced my slides, sorry. We undertook this project because even before the new administration, trans people had been in a dire situation and not at all really represented in HIV trials. So, but now we are in a new context, and just for some background, starting earlier this year, in the beginning of the year, as many of you know, thousands of NIH research grants were terminated. They were mostly targeted at DEI, HIV, and COVID. Half of those cuts went to LGBT health defunding. That total was about $800 million. This wiped out significant chunks of funding to the entire scientific field, to some funding for entire specific fields such as transgender health. And just to put it in more context, trans and gender diverse people have the highest HIV prevalence. The global median is 8.5%, and then the next highest is MSM at about 7.6%. So several years ago in 2021, we at AVAC hired trans and gender diverse consultants, and we embarked on a journey to find out what are the priorities of HIV research for the trans community globally. So basically, we had an advisory group, we hired consultants, we spoke with over 35 advocates and trans researchers across 27 countries. We did lit reviews, surveys, interviews, we attended workshops. And what we came up with was the trans manifesto called No Data, No More. And it's broken into 3 categories. The TGD, the trans and gender diverse lived experience. We know that they encounter tremendous barriers, structural barriers, just to live their lives, their livelihood, and to access healthcare. Gender affirming hormone therapy was a huge issue, as anyone knows. This is foundational to trans care and trans lives. And then the third category that we came across was how to integrate, or what needs to be integrated into HIV research for true trans inclusion. And we packaged this all in a manifesto, and a manifesto is basically put forth by a specific campaign or population who want to see who envision what they want implemented, what they want the world to be like. So it's sort of a roadmap for what they want to see. So from the Trans Manifesto, we focused on the integration of HIV research, the trans inclusion in HIV research. We focused on that, and we came up with, what we found was that there's 14 priorities that trans people want to see in research to qualify as inclusivity for trans people. And I'm going to read these because I think that they're pretty important, although I do have something in the way of my slide. So the 14 criteria for studies, for rating studies that are going to make up the scorecard to see if a study is trans inclusive or not. They include, does the study include non-binary people? Does it include trans men, trans women? If these populations are excluded, is it scientifically justified? Do they say why they have excluded these populations? Are there trans enrollment guides? Is hormone use accounted for as a variable? Is there TGD inclusive data collection? Was there TGD inclusive study communications? Specifically, were there outreach materials that were reaching out to trans people? Are there trans people on staff? Have sites been proven to have experience with the trans community? Are they partnering with trans organizations locally? Is there trans inclusive data in the reporting of the study results? And were the trans findings, the results, were they disaggregated from the other populations? And was there trans inclusive language in the study? So these make up the scorecard. And here's a pretty picture of the scorecard. You can see there's 14 criteria. And it's a very simple yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. Is HIV research inclusive of and responsive to the needs of the TGD communities? We sought to find out. And how did we do that? We looked at the key HIV trials across time, over time. So to the trials we looked at, we chose them. Were they biomedical HIV RCTs? They were enrolling participants between 1991, some of the first treatment trials, all the way through 2023. Were they pivotal? Were they essential to the field? We looked at treatment, we looked at U equals U, HIV vaccines, BNABs, PrEP, etc. Sorry, there's a bar in the way of my slides that I'm having a problem. Okay, sorry. So we looked at the study protocols, publications, records, etc. We looked at clinicaltrials.gov and the AVAC database to really mine for mentions and inclusions and how well the criteria that's in the scorecard were reflected. And then we rated the trials over time. So here are the 41 studies that we looked at. They started in 1991. They go, as I said, they go to 2023. So the ACTG 175 treatment, ritonavir, old school stuff, START, pop art, all the way up to Purpose 1 and Purpose 2. And we rated them. And this is what we found about whether they were inclusive or not. So this basically shows that out of the 41 studies, 12 of the 41 had some sort of trans and gender diverse inclusivity. These were actually all happened in the last 20 years, not the first decades. However, probably trans people were indeed in these clinical trials. They just weren't represented as such. There weren't inclusivity. There were no criteria to include them, et cetera, but we're going to assume they were there. So if you look at the first mention of trans people actually occurred in 2020. I can't see because I have to make my screen bigger. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. We're first mentioned in 2006. It was the STEP vaccine study. They actually, in the inclusion criteria, they put trans people, that trans could join the study. However, after that, there was no mention of trans people, whether they actually did join the study, what the results were for trans people, nothing. It wasn't until 2007 that the AVAC study actually fulfilled the inclusivity, some of the inclusivity requirements that are on the scorecard. And then these are the 12. You can see they're labeled here, or they should be labeled here. I wonder, yeah, you can see the labels are there. And I just want to show you that this icon with the 3 spikes, that is gender non-binary. The green one here is trans men, and this is trans women. So this gives you an idea of how it all plays out once we apply the scorecard. This is, we're quantifying it here. So in total, out of the 41 HIV trials, there was about 180,000, 180,000 participants. Of those participants from 1991 to 2023, 2,532 were trans identified. That's 1.4% of the historic trials of HIV included trans identified people that we were able to identify. And then if you break it down a little further, out of that 1.4%, only 3.6 were transgender men. So 92 transgender men out of 180,000 throughout HIV research. Gender non-binary was a little more at 15.7% of the 1.4%, and transgender women were 80% of that. So this is what we consider trans erasure, and that's an ethical violation. I already just broke down this first bullet. So as you might have noticed, there was a larger, in the pie, there was an ambiguous group, and that was the majority. That was about 75% we rated as ambiguous because we assumed by default, it didn't say whether they were cisgender and it didn't say whether they were trans or not, but we assumed by default, they were assumed by default to be cisgender. It didn't include it didn't say anything in the study that would give us any indication that they were trans. For example, their their sex assigned at birth did not match up with their gender. So probably within this 133,000 people, there was probably a lot of trans people. It just wasn't captured. So what this means when it's not captured is that when trans are in studies and they're not being identified as trans, they're committing their time, they're committing their bodies, their blood, their tissues, their expertise, and they're being erased. They're being erased. And they have urgent HIV-related needs. And as my dear colleague who helped in all this research says, erasure impedes our right to benefit from science. That's Brian Manalga. And this sort of is another way. This is the actual scorecard. Sorry, no, that's not it. This is the actual scorecard. When we break it down, more than half of the trials failed. They get an F for trans inclusivity. And what's really important to see here is that it's not just the older trials. Yes, we see a nice trend where it gets increasingly inclusive as time goes on, but even trials as of the latest trials that we looked at, even up to 2023, some of them failed. So we're still failing trans people in the inclusivity in trials. This is the 14 different criteria, and it says how many were actually reached. So the top, like the most criteria that they were able to the most that was seen across the 41 is that 12 of them, 14 of them were able to do some sort of TGD inclusive data reporting. And the least thing that they were likely to do is, I can't see, sorry, there's a bar. I wonder if there's a way to move this bar out of my way. Oh, here nope. Oh, sorry. The least thing was, hold on. Well, the second to least thing was that only 4 studies were able to actually identify trans-specific study results. That's 4 trials out of 41 were able to identify trans-specific study results. So this, our vision for the scorecard is that we implore research to use it while you are developing your protocols. It's an easy yes, no, 14 questions. And do you have this? Yes. Do you have this? Yes, yes, yes. We want to see yes on everything. So it's a tool for you. It's made by the trans community. Please, this will really, really help with inclusivity. It's also for us, for advocates and activists, to actually hold researchers accountable. It's a checklist. Do you have this, and this? And if not, why not? And in conclusion, I think the most important thing is that about 1% of participants throughout history of HIV trials have been trans or gender diverse. There's often misrepresentation, and so the trans community goes neglected. But we really need to center research questions on study designs, and trans people are being underutilized, and we are offering the scorecard to help. So moving forward, the exclusion of transgender individuals from clinical trials prevents opportunities to receive investigational interventions, and may also hinder access to approved medical products. We actually just happy to say that we published this in the American Journal of Public Health this month. We're excited about that. And just know that going forward, this is not the time to scrub TGD inclusion from HIV trial designs and protocols, regardless of attacks. In fact, now is the moment to use everything at our disposal, including the scorecard. And I'm going to give you a big thanks. And this is the American Journal of Public Health. Okay, thank you all. Now I'm going to put on my host hat, and I wonder if there's any questions. Are you hosting too?
I am going to ask you if that's okay. I have like one question for you.
Sure, please bring it on.
And a comment. So you shared very early on in the scorecard, which by the way is a very helpful tool for researchers, but the critical, essential importance of disaggregated data. And you experienced the challenges of that in doing that extremely detailed review. I mean, I work with a journal, the Journal of the International AIDS Society, and we often struggle to get researchers who themselves are very aware of the need for disaggregated data. Sometimes we struggle to get them to do it because of power considerations, meaning that they have maybe a handful of trans people in the context of a study that is mostly includes participants who identify as men who have sex with men. And so I'm curious how you would advise journals, researchers about how do you deal with that in terms of wanting to disaggregate the data, but not wanting to erase them, like not include them at all.
Yeah, we talked to several researchers about this, like how to power it. And I don't think that there's ever been like a statistical, definitive statistical threshold or anything for how to power it. However, just naming it, acknowledging, or maybe even a sub-study, or just naming that these are the results that trans people, this is just describing it, even though it might not be statistically powered.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, because there's another question in the chat, just to try to get to that one. Do you think this kind of ethical scorecard is generalizable, and could others use similar methods?
Sure, it's generalizable, but when you say others use similar methods,
Maybe
I don't
other
know.
researchers, other populations.
That's actually, I'm going to walk back what I said. I don't know that it's generalizable. I mean, the methodology is you can do the same methodology with different populations, but you really want to hone in on the right criteria. You have to do a major consultation with the community that is that you're working with to study. Like, you really need input from this community. Like, what are the things that they really want to see?
That's a key point. Okay, maybe I'll ask you to put your host hat back on now.
Okay, great. We're going to switch through. Thanks so much, Annette, for playing host. Now I'm going to host you, so I'm going to give you an official introduction. I don't know if you've. So Annette Sohn, you're from Bangkok, from Treat Asia, AMFAR in Bangkok, Thailand, and you're a physician researcher and vice president and director of AMFAR's Treat Asia. And today you are going to be presenting, and I'm excited about this, about mental health, treatment, and maybe Alzheimer's. Great, thanks. Bring it on.
Thank you so much, Cindra. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak on this topic while my slides come up. And I'll be highlighting some of the research we've done through the Treat Asia Network. And like you, I realized I'm moving my slides. So a few notes about the Treat Asia Network, which is a program funded by the U.S. National Institutes of Health and AMFAR, the Foundation for AIDS Research. We're a network which is over 20 years old, combining clinics and research centers caring for children, adolescents, and adults living with HIV in these 12 countries and regions within the Asia Pacific. And so because we have a really long research history, I'm just going to touch on a few examples to kind of give you a sense of the type of scope and value of this kind of regional collaboration to research here within the region, but also globally and potentially in the United States. So the examples I'll review are: first, leveraging HIV treatment data from our network here in Asia; second, simplifying mental health care; and third, studying blood tests for Alzheimer's disease. And all of the studies that I'm going to mention are funded through the US NIH. But before I get into that, just a little bit of context, especially for our people who are watching from the US, is to give you some sense of the numbers here we're talking about in Asia and the numbers that I'll be sharing. So these are data from the US Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, from the latest report on the total numbers of people living with HIV in the US in 2022. So that encompassed 1.24 million people. And if you look at on the right side, the pie chart, which is like kind of hard to tease out some of the small slices, but if you look at the percentages, they're really small percentages of people of Asian heritage, 1.5%, and Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander of 0.1%. In fact, there are about 20,000 AAPI, or Asian American Pacific Islanders, living with HIV in these surveillance estimates. And so if you can imagine doing research studies that involves these communities and represents them, it's quite challenging to have the adequate numbers to have a meaningful assessment of their experiences living with HIV. So if you could kind of keep that in mind as I go through our data here from the region. So the first example of leveraging HIV treatment data, Treat Asia has regional databases that include over 5,300 children and adolescents in one database and over 68,000 adults with HIV in Asia. We're part of a NIH-funded global research collaboration or consortium called IDEA, the International Epidemiology Databases to Evaluate AIDS. And these databases are known as cohort studies. These cohorts allow us to monitor and study HIV treatment success and failure, as well as deaths and their causes, and importantly, share our data with other research, regional and global research collaborations. So this is one example from how we monitor and track data. The graph on the right side shows you sort of proportions of all the people in our database who've ever had a viral load test in a given year and what the viral load test results are. And so you can see over time from the beginning, the 20 years that we've been collecting these data, the beginning, very few people ended up having a viral load test. But then if you move down towards 2023, about half of the people had what's in dark green, an undetectable viral load test, which is a really critical sign of the success of HIV treatment or antiretroviral therapy. But you still had about a third of people with no viral load testing. And so I think what this kind of shows you is that we can use these data to share with policymakers about the quality of the monitoring and the effectiveness of treatment over time of populations here in Asia. And this can be really valuable, especially when you have data from countries that may not be as detailed, not at sort of the research level. And so we can contribute these data to other analyses. And this is one way we do that, which is through sharing our data with other groups that are trying to review data on a global level. And so these are data on deaths associated with HIV in children and adolescents that we shared with investigators from the University of Washington and the Global Burden of Disease Study. And so this made sure that data from kids in Asia were contributed to these global assessments. And the graphs on the right are a little bit complicated, but basically the upshot of it is that it shows over time, if you look at the different age groups and duration on antiretroviral therapy, the rates of death have fallen, but they really do vary by geographic region. These are just the Asia data, but we were able to compare this to data from sub-Saharan Africa and the Caribbean and Central and South America. But I think one statement made by a researcher, the researcher who led this paper, was really useful, and it's in italics at the bottom. Although the achievements of ART or HIV treatment are remarkable, they remain fragile and contingent on continued global collaboration and financial support. And I think I would say this is incredibly important for all of us, but especially for children and adolescents, because kids make up a much smaller proportion of all people living with HIV in every country, whether it's here in Thailand where I'm sitting or in the United States. And so being able to make sure we can combine data across multiple cohorts, databases, or research studies and bring them together to better understand what's happening with the HIV epidemic makes those data more powerful. And so some future research directions for us here at the Treat Asia Network is that we intend to study the health of people with HIV in Asia as they get older and at risk of non-communicable diseases like hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, and cancers. But this is also important for young adults who have grown up with what's called perinatally acquired HIV. Another term for this is lifetime survivors of HIV. And in the United States, there's a community advocacy movement called the Dandelion Movement. And that's another term for lifetime survivors of HIV. And there are over 10,000 in the US. But in fact, when we talk about research studies or cohorts, there are not that many of them involved in these kinds of long-term studies. The NA Accord is the largest research cohort in the US, or reflecting US data, and it's led out of a team from Johns Hopkins University. And in two recent studies that they published, each of the studies included a little less or than 500 young adults. And so if you can imagine trying to make policy decisions, clinical decisions on the basis of small numbers, it can only be beneficial to combine those data with other data from around the world on, in this case, young adults who are lifetime survivors of HIV. So the next example is on simplifying mental health care. And so as some of you may be aware, people with HIV are at higher risk of mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, but screening for this can be both complicated as well as time consuming. So we are studying with our partners a short questionnaire that was developed by Dr. Milton Weinberg at Columbia University that can evaluate mental health of people living with HIV or all people. And there are parallel studies that have been done in New York, Israel, Mozambique, Spain, and South Africa. And the tool is called the Electronic Mental Wellness Tool. And in our region, we're studying this in Malaysia, the Philippines, and in Thailand. we're validating this tool against what's called a gold standard test. And in this case, it's the mini international neuropsychiatric interview. And these are some of the preliminary findings where we think this tool can be a reliable option to screen people here in Asia. But we have found in qualitative discussions or in focus group discussions with people living with HIV participating in our research that mental health care should really be integrated into HIV care in order to improve the follow-up that they receive. But we also heard from them that they are experiencing a double stigma. So stigma against HIV and stigma against having a mental health condition. And all of this would need to be addressed in order to ensure that care for both conditions is accessed and consistently received. And so in the future, we're going to analyze more of our data here in the region, and we are going to compare it to studies done in other countries. And so the third and last example is on studying blood tests for Alzheimer's disease. So about half of people with HIV can have problems with memory and thinking. The medical term for this is cognitive impairment. And the most common cause of cognitive impairment is Alzheimer's disease. And so Alzheimer's disease is a condition where abnormal collections of protein appear in the brain. You can see in the photo on the right side, healthy cells on the bottom right, and sort of in the middle, abnormal Alzheimer's cells, where you can see kind of collections of fuzzy spots there of plaques of protein. And before 2024, you could only diagnose Alzheimer's disease with a test of the fluid around the brain that would be obtained through a lumbar puncture. Having had one, it is not fun. So that is one way to assess for Alzheimer's disease. Another one is a brain scan, and not just a CAT scan or an MRI, a really expensive brain scan called a PET scan. And so it made accessing diagnoses of Alzheimer's very difficult. But after 2024, we now know that we can do some blood tests of biomarkers or levels of protein in the blood that can diagnose and then subsequently monitor Alzheimer's risks. But very few studies of these biomarkers have been done in people living with HIV. And in fact, none had been done in Asia. And so together with our partners at HIVNet here in Bangkok, we were able to support the first study of Alzheimer's biomarkers in people with HIV here in the region. And so this involved testing the samples from 255 older people with HIV here who had undetectable HIV virus levels. So that meant their HIV disease was really well controlled. But we did find that those who had higher Alzheimer's biomarker levels had worse memory and thinking processes or worse cognitive impairment. We're now planning more studies on how to use these biomarkers to predict the progression of Alzheimer's disease and, importantly, consider interventions to help manage the symptoms of Alzheimer's, so the decline in cognition or worsening of memory and in thinking processes. And this includes studying samples from people living with HIV here in Thailand, but also in Malaysia. And so these results were presented at a US HIV research conference called CROI earlier this year. And again, emphasizing that we were able to pull this study together really quickly. The guidelines on this were only released last year. And so being able to have these results ready to go to contribute to future science and research was very valuable to us and was made possible through funding from the US National Institutes of Health. And so I have two sort of conclusions of my reflections on the value of our research to the broader understanding of HIV research and HIV around the world. And that's that research being conducted among people with HIV here in Asia contributes to our understanding of HIV among Asian people with HIV, whether they are here in Asia or in the United States, and can inform improvements in their care. And collaborations like ours here at Treat Asia on a network level can help to leverage data collected in Asia to improve the comprehensiveness of regional and global HIV research studies. And so all of this, again, is only made possible through the support we get from the US government, the NIH, as well as AMFAR, which is a foundation based in New York. And so these are the 9 institutes and centers that support this work. And so we very much appreciate this and hope that we will be able to continue this work into the future. So thank you very much for your time.
Beautiful. That was wonderful. Thanks so much, Annette. I have some questions while we wait. Hopefully, some more coming into the chat. The whole Alzheimer's biomarker, the testing is a real advancement in research. Having a family member with Alzheimer's, I know how the science is so limited. What's going on behind the brain? So, what are the biomarkers that are the test is looking at?
Yeah, so there are like multiple ones with weird numbers and names, but the one that is the most, I think the one that's talked about the most is phosphorylated tau 217 or p-tau. So it's something where if you look up Alzheimer's disease biomarkers online, I think you'll see some of these. There's like 2 main ones, and those were the ones that we tested in our study, but there are also 2 or 3 additional supplemental ones. These biomarker assessments are still quite new. And so we are hoping, actually right now, trying to negotiate a way for us to be able to fund more of this research in the future to test more biomarkers.
And I might have missed it, but you said that the findings in people living with HIV, that that everything was controlled by the ARVs, but that you said that their biomarkers were worse, and so I was wondering, did you compare them? Do they have higher biomarkers than people not living with HIV?
Okay, so this study was only done among people living with HIV. Specifically. So in that case, we were trying to assess whether or not we think these biomarkers are reliable in Asian people first, and then Asian people living with HIV as well. So this sort of intersection between the two, because it's still so new. These guidelines about being able to use these biomarkers they came out in the US last year, which is where we have the bulk of the data. And so I think that's where having even small studies like this to try to gather some data, comparing it to our gold standard, will give us a sense of how reliable we think these biomarkers can be for people in our region. And this gets to the broader benefits of HIV research. So yes, we're doing this work among people with HIV. Yes, we know that people living with HIV have higher rates of cognitive impairment than people without HIV. And so there's that intersection between studying something like Alzheimer's disease in people with HIV who are more likely to have cognitive impairment, and that potentially benefiting people who don't have HIV who have lower rates of cognitive impairment.
Great. I think I saw a question. Does JC virus or other viruses, CMV, HHV6, EBV, have an impact?
My understanding is these biomarkers are pretty specific to Alzheimer's. I'm not sure if there might be some variation, but my understanding, not being a neurologist, is that they are very specific to Alzheimer's disease and related to the plaques that are deposited and associated and tangles associated with Alzheimer's.
One last question. This might not be your purview, but yesterday, Greg Millay just talked about the benefits of HIV research into other fields. And he said NRTIs are now being looked at for, I don't know if it's HIV preventative or treatment of Alzheimer's. Do you know? Can you say something about that?
I think he was talking about Maraviroc. And so Maraviroc being a special antiretroviral that we actually don't really use so much to treat HIV anymore, but that now being found to have beneficial effects on the brain. And so research on this drug was very specific to HIV, and potentially now this drug can be used in neurology and not necessarily in primary HIV treatment. And that sort of gets at this principle that we are learning new things from HIV science that can then be applied to other areas of research, whether it's in infectious disease or in chronic disease.
Yeah, so important. I mean, given the vast numbers of people who are on target to get Alzheimer's, that we go ahead with this research. Annette, thank you so much. And I think we're going to go to a testimonial break with Kathy Fairbass. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Kathy Fairbass, and I'm the Executive Director for the UCLA ACTG Impact Laboratory Center. I began my HIV/AIDS research career over 40 years ago as a college student working in a hospital in New York City during the early days of the pandemic. That time, I spent much of my day in the rooms of young, scared men who were dying all alone from a disease we did not understand. It breaks my heart to think that we are on the precipice of repeating history again. Today, I stumbled across a picture of a friend of mine and his husband living their best life in their retirement. But this future was not always certain, and surely they would not be alive were it not for the protease inhibitors and all the therapeutic interventions that have followed since then. I fully intended to spend the rest of my career fighting to find better therapeutics, cure strategies, and I hope and I pray that we will be able to continue to fight that fight. Thank you to everybody who is joining today, who is participating today, and who is continuing to fight the good fight. This is a fight that is worth fighting. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And so last but certainly not least, we are going to hear from Glenda Gray. Do we have Glenda in the green room? Well, while we're reaching out, sorry. Hello, welcome, Glenda.
Hi.
So
Hi.
a woman who needs no introduction, but I will introduce you. Welcome. Glenda, I assume you're calling in from South Africa, where it is almost 11 a.m.?
From Johannesburg, almost 11.
Okay, great. So Glenda is a pediatrician and co-founder of the Perinatal HIV Research Unit in Soweto, South Africa, and she's currently the CEO and president of the South African Medical Research Council. And she is going to present today on where HIV vaccine fits into the current paradigm and why it's so important. Over to you, Glenda.
Thanks. So I'm the immediate past president of the South African Medical Research Council. And I also sort of, as a pediatrician, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. So I discovered the power of science and the power of evidence in the area of PMTCT, where we used the evidence that we were gathering using ARVs to promote the rollout of antiretrovirals at a time of age denialism where our government refused to give treatment. And if it wasn't for science and the evidence it generated, women in our country would not have accessed ARVs for prevention. So I'm very, very grateful for science. I'm also a Fogarty Fellow. I was a Fogarty Fellow and I'm a clinician scientist. And most of my life, I have received NIH funding to do HIV vaccine research and other research. About a year and a half ago, we were fortunate enough to get USAID funding to start an ambitious program in Africa called the Brilliant Consortium. And this consortium was pivoted to bring a transdisciplinary team of people, including community clinicians and immunologists, virologists, epidemiologists, together to co-create a program to discover, test in the preclinical setting and then to manufacture and do discovery medicine studies. And unfortunately, this year, the USAID terminated our funding, and we were unable to continue this ambitious program. However, we did manage to get funding from the Gates Foundation to cobble together some of these programs. So I'm a beneficiary of NIH funding and a beneficiary of USAID funding to help in HIV vaccine research. And I want to say that this was pivotal funding for us in Africa. And my message today is that we can't stop now. We can't stop investing in an HIV vaccine. And the reason for this is that the world is not on track in controlling HIV. So we're not yet there to get to 2030. And we still have these huge inequalities that we've seen. There's a lack of progress on prevention, and the global numbers of HIV infections are not declining fast enough. in 3 regions of the world, the numbers of HIV infections are rising, and almost 1/4 of people living with HIV are not receiving treatment. And so basically HIV response is at a crossroads now. And whether the world ends AIDS depends on the path that leaders take. And part of this path is around investing in funding. And at a global level, we need to continue to invest in HIV vaccine R&D. 1, to advance HIV prevention and cure modalities that will be critical for pandemic control, and 2, for its role in advancing science at a global level. And we heard a little bit about it yesterday, and around Alzheimer's, around the power of the antiretrovirals, and also around how we were able to pivot to COVID vaccine research because of this ability of HIV vaccine research to help pivot to respond to emergencies or to other areas like non-communicable diseases. This slide comes from the 2024 Global AIDS Update, and kind of shows us why an HIV vaccine is important, and how it will be easy to scale up prevention for all populations if we had an HIV vaccine. In the area of the world where I live, 75% of all infections are in the general population, and this general population, which include young women and adolescents, may not be seen as part of infections and may not be supported in accessing long-acting antiretrovirals or other PrEP. And so an HIV vaccine will be critical to reach everyone and not just key populations. There has been a global investment and global collaboration already, and this is required. And the NIH have led the charge and have been critical for the majority of the pivotal research that we've executed, not only in the US and in LATAM, but also in sub-Saharan Africa, and have been the funders of the majority of the pivotal trials that we've done. Larry Corey said yesterday that HIV, because of its immense strain diversity and its unique but increasingly recognized diverse immune evasion strategies, is a difficult scientific challenge, and that's why we need this global endeavor. As part of our Brilliant consortium, all the investigators from Brilliant put together a paper that's in press at the moment that argues that we are a critical component of research and development in HIV because of not only because of our genetic diversity, but also because of our viral diversity. And that if we don't understand the genetic diversity of our populations and the viral diversity, we may not be able to create a vaccine that induces the kind of immune responses that we require. So there have been a lot of technology. So why can't we stop now? And this is because we have got a lot of technologies that are leapfrogging HIV vaccine R&D at this moment. And I'm going to name some of them. The first is the HIV genome sequencing ability. So we are able to track viral diversity. We have bioinformatic tools that aid vaccine design, and we have databases like the Los Alamos Guide that guide our antigen design. Cryo-electron microscopy and X-ray crystallography revealed the atomic structure of the HIV envelope, which allows us to have a structured-based vaccine design. Engineering immunogens that mimic the virus's shape and expose vulnerable sites to the immune system are critical at this moment, and this is what that cryo-EM and crystallography help us with. With the advances in synthetic biology and mRNA technology, we've been able to do enables quick iteration and helps us move along the path. And now we also have a burgeoning artificial intelligence that can help us predict viral epitopes that induce BNAB responses. Our machine learning models analyze massive data sets of immune responses and viral mutations, which speed up discovery. High throughput screening and systems biology track immune responses at the genetic, protein, and cellular levels to refine vaccine candidates. And we have innovation in clinical trial design, which helps us move vaccines through the clinical development pathway. And with this global sharing, with cloud computing and data large data sharing platforms like the HIV, like the HPTN give us, allow for real-time global collaboration. And so we can't stop HIV research now. It would be a huge tragedy at this time of global scientific discoveries and the technologies that we have to stop the work that we do. So this is my final slide, and I'm going to say we all need to act to save science, communities, scientists, governments. We need to increase, we've heard earlier today that we need to increase domestic funding. So our governments also need to increase domestic funding for HIV and TB. We need to safeguard the investments the NIH has made. We need to strengthen our national research infrastructure, and we need global reinvestment in HIV vaccine R&D. As civil society, which I see myself as part of, we need to advocate for continued support and transparency. We need to mobilize communities and all our stakeholders to demand accountability and to ensure investment in science and in HIV research. And we need to demand that our countries continue to invest in science, and at a global level, there's a commitment to fund HIV research so that we can find interventions that control and eventually eliminate HIV. Thank you very much.
We've got a question in the comments from Mitchell Warren. Question for Glenda. Can you talk about the new funding from the South African government along with the Gates and Wellcome?
So yes, so thank you very much, Mitch. So from the late 1990s, South Africa has always funded HIV vaccine research, first of all through the South African AIDS Vaccine Initiative, and then lately through the MRC and the Department of Science and Innovation through a program called SHIP. So South Africa through the NRF and the MRC are the biggest African funders of research, and that includes HIV research. And when we lost our funding, we immediately, through our universities, alerted our governments. We looked at the burden of what we stood to lose, both in trial infrastructure, in postdocs, and in research personnel. And through our universities and through various lobby agencies, made a call for South Africa to invest both in the PEPFAR loss for treatment as well as research. And luckily, through the Treasury, the Treasury made available money through the NDOH to the MRC, which was matched by both Wellcome and Gates to try and safeguard the kind of investments that the NIH has had. And hopefully this money, so we all had to apply for this money, and hopefully we will hear towards the end of October, early November, who will be the beneficiaries of this money. But this injection of money tries to prevent the leakage and the hemorrhaging of science activity in South Africa, particularly as it relates to HIV research.
Thanks for that, and good luck with that. While we're waiting for other questions, I wanted to ask you about the mRNA vaccine research for HIV. I know that mRNA has been a big target as far as funding, or maybe not. Whiplash. One day it is, one day it's not. But where are we as far as mRNA and HIV vaccines? How far has the research come?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So in our HIV vaccine discovery programs, we are shifting to use mRNA as a platform for our immunogen design. And the reason why we're using it is because it's become quite a well-defined platform. Millions of people tens of millions of people, maybe even tens of millions of people worldwide have had access to the platform, and we know a lot about its safety and its immunogenicity. And so using a platform that's well understood and safe, we're able to use our immunogens that we've discovered using all these technologies that I've described, put them in this platform And this allows us to rapidly do our preclinical testing and get into clinical trials much quicker. And it also allows us, because you can make mRNA vaccines quite faster than protein-based or vector-based, viral vector-based vaccines, it allows us to rapidly make the next iteration or the next part of our vaccine regimen. So this allows us, really, it liberates us and expedites our ability to do this. It also democratizes, in a way, HIV vaccine R&D, because it allows us in Africa to use these platforms. We have a lot of people that are doing the preclinical design who are doing preclinical work using the mRNA platform that allows us to transfer this. And the hope is that eventually, with tech transfer, we'll be able to do a lot of the clinical development as well in South Africa that allows us to rapidly do our HIV research in South Africa. So that's the whole idea of using mRNA as a platform. One, because of its safety, its speed, and its ability to use it and expedite the preclinical work.
Great, thanks for that. Okay, so going back a little bit to the question about resources and funders, I wonder, does big pharma play a role? Can they step in, or do they not have enough discovery know-how?
So we have had collaborations with big pharma in the past. So the HVTN, the Pambili and the HVTN and the STEP study were largely funded by MSD Merck, where they were a Merck study, and then the Mosaico and HVTN 705 or Imbricoda were co-funded through with Janssen and J&J. So they have, and then Sanofi Pasteur also was involved in HVTN 702 and the RV144 study. So we have seen some collaboration with big pharma in some of the vaccine development. And Moderna does support HIV vaccine programs through the Scripps group, and in the recent design protocol, which is an mRNA-based vaccine that's working in South Africa. It's about to start in South Africa. But a lot of the heavy lifting, a lot of the preclinical work, a lot of the discovery, a lot of that big investment in science has to happen with public money, because big pharma is not willing to put money. That we need to de-risk the program. Yep. And the only way you de-risk the program is by having public funding or philanthropy that's funding this. And once you have a product that looks exciting, big pharma will then come to the party. So, we have had good relationships, and we have had contribution with big pharma. But these protocols always have to be de-risked by the public purse or by philanthropy to encourage participation of big pharma.
Great. Sorry. Glenda, we're coming to the top of the hour. Thank you so much for your contributions to the field for all these years, for your research and your advocacy. Is there anything else you want to say before you leave us?
No, that's it. I'm deeply grateful for the investment in science. The public purse has invested a lot, it's particularly through the NIH and USAID in the past, and that we still need to make sure that other countries, particularly African countries, also support this endeavor, given the burden of disease on our continent. And so that would be my parting shot. Science is not a luxury, and each country needs to realize that if you invest in science, you invest in the economy, you invest in the GDP, you invest in jobs in your country.
Beautifully said. Thanks so much, Glenda, for coming on this morning from South Africa. Now we're going to move to the testimonial from Brian Minalga, who was my co-researcher on my presentation. So how apropos. Thanks all. And then we're going to move into the next hour, hour 19. So please.
My name's Brian Manalga, and I work in HIV research. When I was a kid attending public school in the late 90s, the teacher of my health class taught us that AIDS was a disease created by gay men and that all gay people would suffer a horrible death from AIDS. He smiled when he said it. I'm disgusted when I think back to the way this man used his position of power as a public school teacher to package his hateful extremist beliefs as facts and to put his students' health at risk. HIV research set me free. It taught me the objective truth about this virus. And HIV research, free from political influence, matters for everyone, because without the truth, we're not free to make our own choices. We're subject to the motives of others. Save HIV research so that the truth and our lives will prevail.